It's about time you get started learning Webflow because the demand for Webflow websites is off the charts. In this video, we'll be building this cool website, and not only will we be doing it very fast, you'll also learn all the key concepts to get you started with Webflow. If you want to follow along this tutorial, the files for this project are below this video. Let's get started. So here's the design that we're going to be building in Webflow. And before we're jumping into Webflow, I want to show you how this design is actually structured, because Webflow, unlike other design software that you might be familiar with, Photoshop, Figma, or maybe even Canva, in Webflow, you don't just throw things on a canvas and rearrange them in layers. The web actually works in boxes. What does that mean? So each one of these elements on the page that you see here, each link, each text element, each image or a button is actually a box. Because they are boxes, you can define their size, you can define the space between each one of these boxes and how they are rearranged. Now, things become even more complicated than that. Not only these elements are boxes, but there are boxes that manage how other boxes are managed. So for example, you can see that these buttons in the navigation, they're all together as one element laid in one place. They have a background, they have round corner, they have this kind of a glass effect. Then we have this whole navigation. That's actually another element that works together. Maybe we want this whole navigation to be stuck at the top of the page or something like this. So to manage these elements, we basically wrap them inside of a box, and these boxes in web design, they're called divs. And we give them names, which we call classes, so that we can define how they behave. So all of these texts, we might as well wrap them inside of a box and call this hero content so that we can lay them out and treat them together, maybe animate them together. This card element that you can see multiple times here, there's a div that wraps it so that we can define that it has this glass background and round corners. And then we have a wrapper that wraps all of these cards together to manage how they are stacked one next to each other. And then of course, this whole section, this whole hero section is also wrapped inside of a box because this section has this background image. Maybe the next section doesn't have this background image or looks different. So as you can see, everything on this page is basically boxes wrapped inside boxes to manage how things look. Now, if you think that basically I came up with this idea or Webflow came up with this idea, not at all. This is just how the web works. If you go into Apple's website and you right click an element and click inspect, that would basically open up the code. And if you hover on top of elements, you can see that we have a box for a button and another box for a button, and then a box that wraps them together, and then other boxes and other boxes. And you can see that this box is actually a div. You can see that it says div with a class of CTA, call to action, links. So this is how the web works. This is how every website that you see on the internet is structured. And it's very important to analyze the design that you want to build in Webflow so that you can structure it correctly and not just start throwing in elements on the page. Now that you've got this very important concept in your head, now we can actually go ahead and start building in Webflow. And the first thing that we want to do is actually, before we bring in the elements, let's bring the structural elements. So inside of this, first of all, we've got this hero section. So we've got a div that is a hero section, and inside of it, we've got three main wrappers. We've got the wrapper for the products, we've got the wrappers for the content, and the wrappers for the navigation. So that is going to be our first step in Webflow. Let's head into Webflow, and in Webflow, through the add panel, you can see that we've got this div block. That is going to be the main box that we're going to use for everything that we're doing. Specifically, because the first div that we want to create is a section, we can drag this section. It's basically just another div, but it has this fancy icon here just so that we know that this is a section. It's just for easier organization. And through the navigation panel here, you can see what we have here. So we have a body, which is basically the box that contains everything that's on the page. And now we have a box here that's called section. Let's add three more divs inside of this section. You can see that it's nested inside, and I can even show you that it's nested. And let's copy and paste this 3 times. So now we've got 3 different divs blocks inside of this section. Let's give them all classes so that we can later know what they are and define how they're looking. So I'm going to select the section, and right here from the style selector, I'm going to give this a class. This one I'm going to call section, hero section, hero section. First div block, I'm going to call this nav for navigation wrapper because it's going to wrap everything that's inside the navigation. This is going to be maybe hero content. That's going to hold all of the text. And the last one, that's going to be the products wrapper that's going to hold the 3 cards. So now we've got the main organizational elements. Let's see now what we have. Next, we have another actual wrapper, nav buttons wrapper. So let's add that inside of this nav wrapper. Let's add another div inside of the first one. Let's see that it's actually inside. Yep, it is inside. And let's call this nav buttons wrapper. Now we have all of the wrappers set up and we can start actually adding the actual elements like the links here, the logo, and the text. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of the nav buttons wrapper, let's go to the add panel. And now you can see here from the typography, we've got a bunch of stuff here. So let's start with a link, text link, and drag that inside here. And you can see on the right panel that it shows me where it's going to be added, right? Link inside the link wrapper, and I can copy and paste that. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 links. So let me copy that 1, 2, 3, 4 links. Now, as you can see, it doesn't look very good right now, but we didn't get to styling yet. So let's just make sure that we've got the content inside. So that's ski snowboard limited editions and about. Let's double click these links to edit this. Ski snowboard limited edition and then about. Okay, so we've got the navigation. Actually, we also need the logo. Now we've got the assets panel here, and I've already went ahead and upload the assets for this project. If you want, download the assets below this video. I'm gonna drag the logo and drag it in here. And let me just see that I've dragged it to the right place. No, I've dragged it, as you can see, inside the nav buttons wrapper, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to drag it outside. So these 2 elements are nested inside the nav wrapper. And let's actually add a class here. Let's call this logo. We can't see it because it's white on white, but that'll be visible soon enough. Next, in this hero content, we've got a heading, and then we've got a paragraph, and then we've got a button. So again, from the add panel, we've got a heading. Now a heading basically means that it's very important to choose a heading and not just a text and make it big, because a heading basically tells Google that this is the subject or this is an important, it tells us what's in here, right? And we've got a few different headings. 1 is the most important, 6 is the least important. So this was going to be heading number 1. It's the most important. And as you can see, it has some default styling. It is bigger. It does look like a heading. I'm gonna copy the text that we've got here, speed on, fog off, and I'm going to add another paragraph below this. Let's copy the text from here. And what else we have? A button that says shop now. From the add panel, we also have a button. So let's add that right here. Double click, shop now. Okay, so we've got the content. Lastly, we've got this card. Now, we also need a wrapper for each one of these cards. So let's, to this product wrapper, let's add another div. And let's give this a class of card, or maybe card wrapper. No, card. Let's just call this card. And inside of this card, we're going to have an image and then a text element and then this button. So let's go ahead to the assets panel. Let's drag one of the images. Let's hit the high DPI image, which means this was uploaded in a high resolution. So it looks good on high resolution screens. Then let's drag in some text element. And let's copy the text here, this one, and even also the price inside of the same text element. We can paste that here. And now here we have a button, but that's not a regular button like the one that we have here. This is a button with an icon. Now I've uploaded the icon. I've got it here, but I need this to be a button, a linkable item. So from the ads panel, we do have under the basic a link block, which is basically just a normal div, but that's linkable. That's actually a button. So I'm going to drag that here. And this is just an empty box that we can link somewhere. Right now, I'm just going to, inside of this link block, I'm going to drag my arrow. And from the navigation, you can now see that we've got a text link block that has the icon inside of it. Okay, basically this card, we can copy that 3 times and later we're going to change the images, but we've got 3 cards now. Okay, at this point, although it looks very, very ugly, we've got all the content that we need right now. And now we can get into the styling. Okay, so for some of these things, we gave classes like hero content, which means we can go ahead and style them. But some classes are basically native, right? So we've got things like the body. And that's the first thing that we want to start styling, because the body, the way that classes and styling works on the web, that when we make a choice for an element that has stuff nested inside of it, the choices made on the parent element are going to be reflected with everything that's inside. So for example, for this body, I don't even have to create a class for it. I can just click it and you will see that there's a native HTML tag here, body, that's affecting all pages. And it's great to edit this because I won't have to edit the class of the body on every page on the website. So I'm gonna click that. Now the choices that I'm going to make here, choices like I can scroll here and change, for example, the background color. Let's pick some bluey color, that's nice. And if I change the font, for example, I'm gonna change it from Arial to Montserrat. And you can see as I'm scrolling through the fonts, all of the fonts throughout the page are going to change to the new font that I chose, because everything that's nested inside the body is inheriting the font choice and the background choice that I've set for the body. Okay, so we've styled the body. Let's move into styling the hero section. So this hero section has two things that we need to define. Number one, it has this background image of this person. And the second thing is the spacing between the elements that are inside the box, inside the hero section, and the edges of the box. We call this inner spacing padding. And so we're going to define that everything has a little bit of space from the edges of hero section. So let's head back, make sure that we selected hero section. And first of all, we're going to scroll down and find backgrounds and add an image. And I'm going to choose an image. I'm going to choose this image that we have here. Now I've selected it, but I can't really see it in here. And that's because the image is pretty big. So under the size, I'm going to set it from custom to cover. Now, basically cover, what cover means is that it's just going to fit the image into the size of its div block. And this looks pretty good. I can actually even go into the position and make sure that it's centered, and that looks pretty good. Okay, the second thing, I'm going to scroll up here and I'm going to have this spacing. And you can see that we have spacing inside of the box that is called padding. And we also have spacing outside of the box that is called margin. Now in this case, I want to add some spacing from the top and from the left and from the bottom and from the right side. Now I can also hit Option and Shift while I'm dragging, and it's going to add spacing, equal spacing from all sides. I think in this case, 40 is going to be enough. And you can see this green dashed lines that basically tells us how things are spaced out. Okay, so hero section, looking good. Let's go and start looking at the navigation that we've got here. Okay, so this nav wrapper, let's take a look at that. The first thing that we have here is here you can see that we've got the logo taking up the whole space, and then we've got the links taking up the whole space. And what we want is we want the logo on the left side and the links on the right side. So how do we do that? Well, if I'm going to go ahead and select the nav wrapper, and I see that it has two elements, the logo and the nav button wrappers. Right now, if I'm going to head into the layout, you can see that they're displayed as block. And block basically means that elements take up the whole space. Now, if we change that to flex, that's going to give us way more options. And if you're familiar with Figma and auto layout, this might look familiar. Now it's basically setting them up one after another horizontally instead of vertically, and they're aligned to the left. So now you can see they're one next to each other. But instead of aligning them to the left, you can see I can change here, align center, right, and I can also have space between, which means basically that the right side is going to be aligned to the left, and the right side is going to be aligned to the right, and the left to the left. There's enough equal spacing between them, and that's exactly what we want. So this is actually great. That's all we had to do here with this nav wrapper. And the next thing that we want to do is take a look at the hero, right? At the nav buttons wrapper. This also defines the spacing between these links and that they have this kind of like a glass effect. So let's see how we're going to do that. Let's select the nav buttons wrapper, and let's go down and select the background, white background. And when I'm going to do that, you're going to see the problem immediately, and there is no space between the edges. Remember, we call this space padding. Let's add the same way by holding Option and Shift, a little bit of padding, something like 20, between the edges of the wrapper and the elements inside. So that is great. Next, I want to space these elements a little bit. And if I'm going to change the display layout to flex again, flex is super, super powerful. So you can see that we've got a gap. And that's basically the spacing between the elements that are stacked, in this case, horizontally. And if I'm going to add something like 30, maybe even 40, I think that looks pretty good right now. So now the elements are spaced out. Now we wanted to have round corners for this. So let's scroll down here, and below we've got border and radius, and I can turn that up, crank that up. The top here is 20, and you see that's not enough. So actually I'm going to write down like maybe 200 pixels. I'm just going to manually write that, and that gives it a full round corners. So that looks good. Let's take care of the glass effect. So right now it's a full white color, as you can see, but I can actually bring that down. This is the opacity. Let's bring down the opacity to something like 70. Now you can see that we've got transparency introduced here. So that is great. And if I'm going to scroll down here into the effects, we've got backdrop filter, which means filters that affect the background. So if I'm going to click here, by default, it's blur, and you can see blur 5 pixels, and that actually gives us this glass effect. So this looks pretty good. Actually, you know what? I think that we need a little bit more spacing on the left and the right. So I'm just going to hold Option to just from left and right without affecting the top and bottom, add a little bit more padding here. And I think this looks better this way. Okay, so we've got the nav wrapper. Now we need to define how the actual links look like, right? So they are uppercase, they have a different color here. Let's see what color they are. So I'm going to select this, and you can see that they have this dark color. So let me copy this color because we're going to need to use this. Let's see. This is Montserrat, regular, 18, and uppercase. So let's go here, and you can see that this is a link. Now, as I've said, links, kind of like the H1, have their own HTML tag, but I do not, in this case, I do not want to affect all the links on the website because this is a particular link. This is a navigation link, right? So let's give this a class. Let's call this nav link. And now we can start styling it, right? We can scroll down, typography, maybe increase this to 18. We've got text decoration, underline. I don't need the underline, so I'm going to remove that. I can open up the more type options and set the capitalization to all caps. This looks good. And I can change the color here. Let's paste here the color, the blue color that we've had here. And now this looks good. It's actually not normal. It should be probably medium. Okay, so that's good. Now, when it comes down to the colors, I want to show you something. You see this rectangle, purple icon here? These are variables. Now, because I'm going to reuse this color throughout the website, I want to make sure it's consistent and it's easy for me to choose. So I'm going to add a new variable for this color, and let's call it dark blue. Later on, I'm going to want to reuse that color for the heading here, so it's good to create a variable from it. Now you can see that this looks great now, but the effect is not applied here. The styling is not applied, and that's because we didn't apply the navlink class to these. So let's click here nav, and you'll see it's already suggesting the navlink, and I can go ahead and very quickly reapply these. Now the beautiful thing about using these classes is that if I want to make some change to this class, let's say 18 pixels is too big, let's decrease this to 16, you can see that all the elements we share this class immediately resize, and that makes designing much more effective. Okay, so we've got the navigation done. It's time to take a look at the text here. So we've got this big heading here, 132 Montserrat medium. Let's go ahead here. And in this case, I'm selecting the heading. Now I can add a class, but I can also edit the tag for all H1 throughout the website. And that's a good idea because we probably have other pages that are going to use this H1 class. So I'm selecting that. In color, I can go ahead and pick my dark blue color. That's easy at this point. Montserrat bold, I actually want this to be maybe semi-bold and make this really big, like 130, maybe 120. And the line height should be way bigger here. So let's just increase this. Okay, this looks better. Now, paragraph I think is okay, but you can also see that it's taken up the whole screen. Now, one thing that we have here, we wrap these things in a div so that this hero content, so that we can define its size. And in this case, we don't want this to take up the whole space. We want this to be, limited so that the text doesn't go on the top of the person that we have here. So let's actually go ahead and choose the hero content wrapper that we have here and head back into the size, and let's do something like maximum width of, I don't know, maybe 650 pixels. That's great. Now you can see that this area of content is limited to a maximum of 650 pixels, and that makes the texture break nicer and doesn't go on top of his face. We could probably also want to give a little bit more spacing. As you can see, there is more space here from the top. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of margin for hero content. I think that looks nicer. Okay, so now that we've got this, let's style the button. This one we can actually call this button. And what do we need to do here? Basically need to give this very strong pinkish color. So let's copy that. Uppercase font and round corners. So let's see how we're going to do this. Most of it we've already done, right? I can go into background color and paste this pink. Also probably want to add a variable here and call this pink because we will be using this pink again. Go down into corner radius and add something ridiculous like 200 to make this round corner. Make the text all caps. We've done that from the typography. Capitalize. So that looks good. And I do feel like to make this button a little bit bigger like it is here, it does need a little bit more padding between the edges of the top, and you can see here, and the left and right. Okay, I think this is nicer. Okay, this is good. And also, now we've got, I see that this whole hero content here probably needs bottom padding as well, because otherwise we'll have these cards sticking without spacing from the bottom. Okay, so with the content looking good, now let's handle these card elements. So how do these card elements look like, right? These cards, basically round corners with this glassy effect and a little bit of padding so that the image does not touch the edges. Okay, let's do that. We've already created this glass effect here. Shouldn't be difficult. So let's pick the card. Also these cards are currently, taking up the whole space as a block element, but maybe we want each card to be, we can see here that the size is 345. So let's start by defining that the card has the width of 345 pixels. Okay, that's okay. Now, let's see. Let's go into the background and pick a white background, 70% opacity, kind of like we did in the navigation. Round corners. This time, I think it needs round corners of maybe 20 pixels. Sounds about right. We can check in Figma, but I think that is okay. A little bit of padding. So from all sides. So a little bit of padding. Okay, that looks good. And the glassy effect was right here at the bottom. Backdrop effect. Blur 5 pixels. That's okay. Okay, so the card is okay. But as you can see, the cards are stacked one on top of the other. They're not stacked one next to another. So we already seen how we can rearrange elements inside of a wrapper. I'm going to choose their wrapper, products wrapper, and I'm going to change the layout to flexbox because that allows us to define the direction, right? So now they're stacked left to right instead of top to bottom. So this actually looks not very bad. We only want a little bit of spacing between these cards. So this looks pretty good. Okay, so this layout looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and edit how the image looks like. So you can see that the image also has round corners. So image, let's call this card image. And go ahead, it's probably going to be less than 20. If the top is 20, this is going to need to be a little bit less because it's inside of the round corners. I think 17 looks good. Okay, so the image is okay. Now we've got these two elements. Okay, so these two elements, I also want to align them left and right. Remember, we already did that right here in the navigation. So maybe a good idea is going to be to wrap them inside of a div so that we can turn that into a flex that aligns them left and right. So let's see how we're going to do that. Currently, the card has the image and then text block and a link block. Let's wrap them inside of a div. This is such a common thing in Webflow that you can actually do this by right-clicking on the element, and you can see wrap in. div block, and even further, you can wrap them in a horizontal flex, which is what we want, right? We want this div to already be set to a horizontal flex to put them one next to each other instead of one on top of the other. So I'm going to wrap them in horizontal flex. That being said, only the text block has been wrapped in this flex block. So let's bring in the icon as well. Sorry, bring in the link inside. And now you can see they're stacked one next to each other. Let's actually give a class to this flex box so that we can, let's call this card info wrapper. And you can see it's already set to flex, but what we want to do is change the alignment to space between, kind of like we did at the navigation. So now we've got the text in here. I can go ahead and double click and make this text bolder if I want. And we've got the icon here. And probably also for this card info wrapper, we're going to give it a little bit of a top margin and maybe even a little bit of padding from left and right, so the text have a little bit of spacing from the edge of the card and the image. Now the last thing for us to do is to edit how this icon looks like. So we've got this image inside of a link block. So this link block, let's go ahead and give this a background of the pink. So from the backgrounds, we can pull in the pink, and you can see that, okay, we need a little bit of padding between the edges of the link block. And oh, note what happened, which is very important. I started styling this without giving the link block a class name. And so Webflow by default just created a name for this link block. This is not a good practice. So later on, I'm not going to know what this link block is. So let me go ahead and rename this. I'm going to call this arrow icon button, maybe. Button. And now I know what this is. So now I'm going to add a little bit padding. Okay. So now you can see how this looks like when there's spacing between the edges of the wrapper and the icon itself. And let's make this round by going down and giving this 200 pixels of round corners. Now you can see the problem here is this, it doesn't look super aligned. I actually want to reduce the top padding a little bit just so that it visually looks like, yeah, the arrow is centered. I think this looks much better. Okay, so now this card looks good. These cards don't have the same structure, right? So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and delete these two other cards and just copy and paste this first card that we've got here and paste it. And now double click on the image, replace this image here with another image, and double click this to replace this with another image. And of course, we can go ahead and replace the text and everything else that we need to do. But with that, we are done designing our hero section of this website. Now, of course, there's still much to do. We still need to make sure that this website is responsive, and we need to add some interactions, but I feel like we've covered enough for this video. Now, if you want to dive deeper and become a Webflow pro, check out our full course in the link below this video, the Webflow Masterclass. That will take you from beginner to an expert. And I hope to see you with us. I'll see you in the next video.